few months ago, I turned 65. My partner, Albert, who's 67, and I have been together for around 11 years. I have 2 grown-up kids from a previous marriage. My daughter Fiona, who's 43, and my son Louis, who's 40. For almost 10 years, I didn't have any contact with Louis. There's a lot to that story, which I'll get into later. After both Fiona and Louis stopped talking to me, I decided to focus on building a happy life with Albert. For a long time, I felt really down, but eventually, I found a sense of peace and started feeling content with my life. That was until my ex-husband, Curtis, came back into the picture and turned everything upside down. Curtis, who's also 67, has been in my life for as long as I can remember. Our dads worked in the same field, so we'd see each other at work events when we were kids, but we didn't really talk back then. When we were teenagers, he started showing interest in me. He'd flirt whenever we saw each other and went out of his way to get my attention, even showing up at my school to take me out. I have to admit, I liked the attention. It felt good to be wanted, and I appreciated how much effort he put into pursuing me. First, things with Curtis were great. He was a real gentleman, thoughtful, kind, and very traditional. He liked being the one in charge and taking care of everything. He planned all our dates and made most of the decisions, from where we'd eat to bigger things like whether I should go to community college. I didn't mind much at the time. I liked having someone so confident and decisive in my life, and I usually went along with what he wanted. But sometimes, I felt a little frustrated because my own opinions didn't seem to matter much. I've never been one to stir up conflict, so I just let it go and went with the flow. Since his decisions seemed reasonable and didn't cause me any harm, I was okay with him taking the lead. After high school, I decided to skip college and get a job instead. School wasn't really my thing, and I was more interested in learning hands-on skills and, most importantly, making my own money. My family wasn't well off, so being financially independent felt really important to me. I wanted to be able to help my parents and have my own income, so I wouldn't have to depend on anyone else. Curtis wasn't a fan of the idea of me going to college. He was very protective and said he didn't want me around other guys, claiming they only had one thing on their minds and that I was too naive. He was actually happy when I told him I wanted to work instead. Still, he tried to talk me out of it, saying he wanted to take care of me and provide for everything I needed. But I stood my ground, and even though he wasn't thrilled, I got a job as a line cook at a local diner. I've always loved cooking, so it felt like a great way to build my skills. A few years later, when I turned 21, Curtis proposed, and we got married a few months after that. We moved into the house he inherited from his parents. Curtis was very attentive and made sure I felt comfortable and settled in our new home. He kept the kitchen stocked and bought me anything I asked for. I felt really happy at first. But a few months into the marriage, he started pushing me to quit my job again, saying his income was enough and we didn't need the extra money. When I resisted, he'd get upset, saying that me working made it seem like he couldn't provide for his wife. He became more and more possessive, not even wanting me to talk to the neighbors or go to the store alone. Eventually, he agreed to let me keep working, but only if I handed over my entire paycheck to him each month so he could manage our finances. When I was pregnant with Fiona, I got really sick and ended up having her prematurely. She had to stay in the hospital's special care unit for a month, and even after we brought her home, she was still fragile. Curtis insisted I quit my job to take care of her until she got stronger. I agreed. My baby needed me. Thankfully, Fiona grew stronger, and by the time she was 2, I started thinking about going back to work. Curtis was completely against it. He used Fiona as the reason, saying she was too young to be without her mom and that staying home a few more years would be better for her. Then I got pregnant with Louis, and a few years after he was born, when I tried to bring up working again, Curtis flat out refused to even discuss it. He told me my job was to be a mother and homemaker, and that my kids needed me. He said there was no reason for me to work when my only responsibility was to take care of the kids and the house. He even said it was disrespectful to him that I wanted to work, especially since he was taking such good care of us. Back then, I didn't realize how Curtis was playing with my emotions and using guilt to keep me at home. I knew he didn't like the idea of me working, but using our daughter as a way to control me just felt wrong. I was getting more and more frustrated with him, but I stayed quiet to avoid fights. Curtis had this way of making me feel guilty about everything, even stuff I had no control over. I'll never forget one time when he told me I was a bad mom because I was always thinking about work, and he blamed me for Fiona being born early and having health problems. Crushed me. We had a huge fight, and it left me so exhausted that I went to stay with my mom for a few days. Later, Curtis apologized and somehow convinced me to come back home. That's how it always went. We'd have these terrible arguments, Then he'd suddenly become sweet and sorry, begging me to forgive him, and like an idiot, I'd go back. A few months after that, I tried to talk to Curtis calmly. I told him the kids were getting older and didn't need me as much. But he wouldn't budge, and in a fit of anger, he yelled, "You'll never work as long as you live under my roof. You're a mother and a wife, and that's all you'll ever be." As time went on, things just got worse. Curtis started controlling every little part of my life. He told me I couldn't even talk about work anymore, and I was expected to do all the childcare and housework without a break. Even when I was done with everything, I couldn't see friends, go out, or visit my parents without his permission. He wouldn't let me get a driver's license and didn't want me using public transportation, so I was totally dependent on him to go anywhere. He even decided what I could wear, and if he didn't like my outfit, he'd start a fight. I wasn't allowed to share my feelings or opinions. He made all the decisions, even about the kids. It felt so unfair because they were my children too. The kids were really unhappy at the school they were going to. They kept telling me how other kids were picking on them and begged me to talk to Curtis about switching schools. But he wouldn't even consider it. He didn't care how anyone else felt. I remember one day Louis came home in tears after a really rough day at school. I tried to comfort him and told him I'd talk to Curtis about it. When I did, Curtis just brushed it off, saying, "They're being too sensitive. They need to toughen up. Changing schools won't fix anything. Bullies are everywhere." I tried to explain that it wasn't just normal kid stuff, but he shut me down with, "I've made my decision. End of story." As the kids got older, I poured all my energy into taking care of them, making sure they had what they needed. They were my main focus. Curtis had basically turned me into a full-time homemaker. All the dreams and curiosity I had when I was younger were gone. I did whatever he wanted, even if it meant ignoring my own feelings, and I felt like I'd lost myself completely. He loved how obedient I was and would show me off like some kind of trophy, calling me the perfect wife, and bragging about how he was the man of the house, providing for his family like a real man. It was like he had this deep insecurity. He acted like if I had any say in anything, it would somehow make him less of a man. He'd even make comments in front of our friends, saying things like, "Look at my wife, always so agreeable. A real woman knows her place." Those remarks always made me cringe, but I never spoke up. By the time Fiona started college, I was completely done. Any love I'd ever had for Curtis was long gone, and everything finally came to a breaking point one night. I'd started experimenting with making homemade sauces like marinara and pesto in the kitchen, and whenever we had guests over, they loved them so much they'd ask for the recipes. I kept the recipes to myself and offered to make batches for them instead. A few people even suggested I should start selling the sauces because they were so good. I didn't think anyone would actually buy them, but I started getting a few orders from friends. Curtis hated it. He called it a waste of time and told me to stop because it was making him look bad. I told him I'd always gone along with what he wanted, but I really thought the sauce business could go somewhere. That set off a huge fight. I had an order due the next day, and Curtis, in a rage, smashed all the jars of sauce on the kitchen floor. He warned me that if I ever disobeyed him again, there'd be serious consequences. I remember cleaning up the broken glass, crying over the mess, and Curtis just stood over me, his face red with anger, saying, "This is what happens when you don't listen. You're my wife and you'll do as I say." That whole situation made me see just how far he was willing to go. He didn't care about the effort I put in or respect me at all. That was the last straw for me. I packed up my things and left. This time I was really scared for my safety, and I wasn't going to let him talk me into coming back. I was done letting him control me. He tried everything to get me to stay, even playing mind games and saying he'd hurt himself if I left. But I knew if I gave in, he might end up hurting me instead. I made up my mind to file for divorce. He was furious and caused a big scene, but I stood my ground. The divorce process was long and tough, but when it was finally over, I felt a huge weight lifted off my shoulders. The kids were older and living their own lives by then, so they didn't ask too many questions about why we split up. I didn't want to ruin how they saw their dad, so I just told them we'd grown apart. I didn't want to drag them into the middle of it, and surprisingly, Curtis agreed with me on that. After the divorce, I moved back in with my parents and threw myself into work. For the first time in over 20 years, I could focus on what I wanted without worrying about anyone holding me back. I went back to working at a restaurant, and my side hustle making sauces really took off. My kids were amazing. They helped me set up a website to sell the sauces online and even promoted it at their colleges. Before I knew it, I was getting orders almost every day and had to cut back my hours at the restaurant to keep up. My parents' garage turned into my sauce-making hub, and my whole family jumped in to help. Eventually, I made enough to move into my own place. The business kept growing, and within a couple of years, I needed a whole warehouse to handle the demand. I hired employees and built a successful brand, and I loved every minute of it. Curtis wasn't happy about any of it. Even after being separated for over 2 years, he kept bothering me, begging me to come back and saying he'd changed. But they were the same old, empty promises. I realized he'd been holding me back all along. Now that I was free, I was truly happy. I'd built a thriving business, and I think maybe he'd always been scared of what I could do without him. He'd call me late at night sometimes and say things like, "You'll never find someone who loves you like I do. You're nothing without me." But I just brushed it off. I'd moved on, and I was finally living my best life. Getting back into dating after everything with Curtis wasn't easy. I had a hard time trusting people and mostly kept to myself. I didn't think I'd ever find love again. But then Albert came into my life. It happened naturally. He was a regular customer who loved my sauces and always placed big orders. He even helped me land some wholesale deals. We started talking more and spending time together. And though I wasn't looking for anything serious, I slowly realized I was developing feelings for him. He was nothing like Curtis. Instead of shutting down my ideas, Albert encouraged me to dream bigger and grow my business. He actually listened to me and made me feel like my thoughts mattered. It was such a refreshing change. He became a true friend and a huge support, and over about a year, our feelings grew deeper. I fell in love with him. It's hard to explain, but I felt a connection with him that I'd never had before. After being undervalued for so long, I didn't even know what real love felt like until Albert came along. Even Fiona and Louis liked him, which meant so much to me. I was finally rebuilding my life. But then, a few months before things shifted, I noticed my kids acting differently. They became distant, barely calling or texting, and when they did, they seemed cold and almost rude. I tried reaching out to them, but it was clear something was wrong. Felt like they were mad at me, but they wouldn't tell me why. Meanwhile, my business was doing great, and I decided to throw a celebration to mark how far I'd come. I invited friends, family, employees, and colleagues. It was a big deal for me. Fiona and Louis initially made excuses, but after some convincing, they agreed to come. Albert was away on a business trip and couldn't make it, so I really wanted my kids there. The party was amazing. So many people showed up to celebrate my success. It felt like a milestone, a way to honor how much my life had changed for the better. If someone had told me 5 years earlier that I'd be where I was, I wouldn't have believed it. In a way, the party was a celebration of my independence and everything I'd accomplished. But my kids stayed distant. Instead of joining in, they hung back in a corner, acting like they didn't want to be there. It was obvious they were upset with me, but I had no idea what I'd done to hurt them. It was confusing and painful, especially on a night that was supposed to be so happy. After everyone arrived, I gave a short speech to thank my kids and Albert, because without them, none of my success would have been possible. While everyone clapped, Fiona and Louis suddenly stormed off to the backyard, looking furious. I was confused and followed them, only to be hit with a wave of angry accusations. Louis seemed like he was about to cry, and Fiona called me a fraud, a cheat, and someone who takes advantage of others. She said she couldn't believe I was such a terrible person, and that someone had recently opened their eyes to my true nature. They were disgusted with me. The whole party went silent as my kids tore into me, accusing me of things I'd never done. I had no idea where they were getting this from, but it was clear they believed it. I begged them to tell me who had fed them these lies, but they refused. One of them yelled, "How could you do this? We admired you. How could you be so heartless?" It was awful. The party was ruined. My kids said they hated me and thought I was manipulative, and I had no clue why. My parents tried to step in, but my kids said they were done with me and wanted nothing to do with me anymore. They even said they were cutting off all contact. I was heartbroken and completely lost. My own kids, who had always been my biggest supporters, now despised me, and I didn't even know why. Over the next few weeks, I tried everything to reach out to them, but they shut me out completely. Nothing I said or did made a difference. I even went to their homes to talk, but they called security and had me removed. I was crushed and sank into a deep depression. I started to suspect Curtis might have had something to do with it, but when I confronted him, he denied everything and said I was just paranoid. To make things worse, Albert and I broke up. He told me his ex-wife wanted to get back together, and he didn't want to be with someone as emotionally unstable as me while he was dealing with his own problems. It felt like my whole life was falling apart. My kids, my relationship, everything. The only thing I had left was my company. So I threw myself into my work. I didn't know how my life had spiraled so out of control, but I'd faced tough times before, and I was determined to bounce back. Within a few months, I managed to grow my business significantly and got offers for better opportunities in another state. With nothing left to lose, I decided to take a chance and move. It was a fresh start in a new place, and it would help my business grow too. With my parents' support, I relocated and focused entirely on my work. It was my way of rebuilding after everything had fallen apart. For over a year, my kids didn't reach out to me, but I held on to hope. I tried contacting them, but they had blocked me everywhere. Then, after a few months, Albert showed up. He admitted he'd made a mistake by leaving me when I needed him most. He said he still loved me, that he couldn't stop thinking about me, and he apologized for everything. He promised to always be there for me, and I took him back. Maybe it was because I felt so alone and broken at the time, but having him around brought me some comfort. That was 9 years ago, and we've been together ever since. Albert and I are still a couple, though we never got married. I don't feel like we need to. He's been a great partner, and aside from that one short breakup, our relationship has been solid. My business has also done really well. But the one thing that never got better was my relationship with my kids. I didn't hear from them at all, until last week, when everything came crashing down. Fiona called me. She sounded devastated and told me Curtis had passed away. Before he died, he confessed everything to them. My heart dropped. She explained that 9 years ago, someone had told her and Louis that I was a cheater and a gold digger. They said I had been unfaithful to Curtis throughout our marriage, that I was only with him for his money, and that I took everything from him during the divorce to fund my company. They were shown fake documents and other proof to back up these claims. This person painted me as a heartless, manipulative woman who only cared about money and used people for my own gain. They warned my kids that I would eventually destroy them too and told them to cut me out of their lives for good. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. When I asked her who told her all this, her answer made me sick to my stomach. She said it was Albert. I thought it had to be some horrible joke, but Fiona kept going. She told me Albert had met with them, spilled all this information, and even showed them fake documents. He claimed I had told him everything and that he couldn't stand the fact that I was such a terrible person. He said he was planning to break up with me but wanted to expose my true self to my kids first. They believed every word, which is why they suddenly started acting so cold toward me. Then there was that argument at the party, and after that, they cut me off completely. They even asked Curtis about the accusations. At first, he denied it to protect me, but eventually, he backed up Albert's story, saying I was promiscuous and manipulative. That sealed it for my kids, and they decided they wanted nothing to do with me. For almost 10 years, they thought I was a monster. But last week, Curtis, who had been sick for a while, took a turn for the worse. Before he died, he finally came clean. He admitted that Albert was actually his friend and that he had paid him to pretend to fall in love with me, gain my trust, and then ruin my life by lying to my kids and tearing us apart. Curtis confessed that all the documents were fake and that I had never done any of the things I was accused of. After Albert finished the job, Curtis paid him, and Albert broke up with me. That was the whole plan. On his deathbed, Curtis said he did it for revenge after our divorce. He felt like he had taken such good care of me during our marriage, but I still wasn't happy. He wanted me to feel the same pain he did, so he set up this whole twisted scheme. I'll never forget Fiona's voice on the phone, trembling and full of tears. She said, "He told us he wanted you to suffer, Mom." In that moment, everything felt like a bad dream. I hung up, completely numb. I couldn't wrap my head around what I just heard. The worst part? Albert and I were still together, and in all those 9 years, he never once mentioned any of this. For nearly a decade, I'd been living with the man who betrayed me and destroyed my life. I didn't know what to do, so I packed a bag, flew to my mom's house, and told her everything. It's been 2 days, and I'm still trying to process it all. Albert keeps calling, but I've blocked his number. I'm meeting my kids tomorrow, and I have no idea how it's going to go. How do I even begin to deal with this? I feel completely lost. 1 minute, I'm numb, and the next I just want to scream. Update 1. There's been a lot to take in. I didn't expect so many people to see my story. I was just trying to get things off my chest, but I've been flooded with messages and comments. I'm still going through them, but I'm really thankful for all the support. I know people have been waiting for an update, and I'm sorry it took so long. It's been over a month, and life has felt like a total mess. I haven't had the energy to write, but I do have something to share. Even after all this time, I'm still struggling to make sense of everything. Sometimes it feels like a bad dream, and I keep hoping I'll wake up and things will go back to normal. My mom has been my rock through all of this. So, after almost 10 years of no contact, I finally met with Fiona and Louie. It was incredibly emotional. They hugged me, and we just sat together in silence for a long time, trying to process everything. They apologized over and over for how they treated me all those years. They said they were wrong to believe Albert so easily and wished they could take it all back. They seemed truly sorry, and it was really hard to hear. I get how people you love can be manipulated. I've lived through that my whole life. I don't blame my kids, but it still hurts that they believed Albert and Curtis over me without even hearing my side. I also found out more about Curtis. He'd been battling cancer for over 2 years and passed away. He only told Fiona and Louie the truth because he didn't want to die with the guilt. Curtis was my husband for 20 years, but I don't feel sad about his death. When Fiona told me, I just thought, of course, even in death he's avoiding facing me. He couldn't even look me in the eye, not even when he was dying. As for Albert, all I feel is betrayal and pain. My kids had no idea he and I were still together. When he talked to them, he made me out to be some kind of monster and said he was going to leave me, which he did for a little while. But why did he come back and stay with me for so long? His deal with Curtis was that he'd leave me after getting paid. But he didn't. I have so many questions, but I'm scared of the answers because I don't think I can handle any more hurt. Albert's been trying to reach out. He's in the same city and has been showing up at my mom's house almost every day, trying to talk to me. But I can't stand the thought of seeing him. I just want him to disappear and leave me alone. At the same time, I need to know why he did what he did. How could he say he loved me while betraying me so completely? I'm so frustrated, but I've agreed to meet him in a few days. I'll let you know how it goes. Update 2. I met with Albert and it was awful. He looked terrible, like he hadn't slept in weeks. The moment I saw him, I just broke down. Everything hit me at once. The man I loved had hurt me worse than anyone ever had. He got down on his knees and begged me to forgive him. He said he only went along with what Curtis told him to do because he needed the money. He was going through a divorce and had lost everything, and Curtis offered him a lot of cash. But Albert swore he never meant to fall in love with me. He said he realized pretty quickly that what he was doing was wrong, that I was a good person who didn't deserve any of it. He tried to back out, but Curtis threatened him, saying he'd hurt him if he told the truth. Curtis was dangerous, so Albert stayed quiet and went through with the plan. After it was over, he left me, but he said he couldn't stop thinking about me and felt guilty for ruining my life. When he found out I'd moved and my kids weren't talking to me, he decided to come back into my life secretly. Neither my kids nor Curtis knew we were back together. He said for 9 years he wanted to tell me the truth but was too scared I'd leave him. He felt terrible about it, but he loved me so much that he kept it hidden. And then he had the nerve to ask me to forgive him and take him back. He said now that I knew everything, we could finally be honest and start over. I couldn't believe he even said that after all he'd done. I slammed the door in his face. He actually looked me in the eyes and said, I did it for us, so we could be together without Curtis controlling us. I was so angry I could have screamed. I don't think I'll ever be able to trust or love anyone again. Everyone I've loved has ended up hurting me. Maybe one day I'll be able to tell Albert exactly how I feel, but right now I just want peace. I wish I could forget this whole mess. Life feels so unfair, and even though I'm going to therapy, it doesn't seem to be helping much. I hope things get better, but right now I feel completely lost.